All right, folks, it's Friday. I'm bored. I should be working on linear algebra, but I'm not in the mood. Instead, I've decided to record one of those meme tier list videos. And today we're going to be ranking the topics covered in Calculus 3 in Math ampersand 163. So here are our categories. S tier. S tier is the monster from It Follows. S tier are the topics that literally will track you down for the rest of your entire life if you're doing anything in the area of STEM. A tier, if forget, then regret. A tier is the stuff that if you forget this, you're going to wind up in a class later on or in a job later on where you're going to wish you remembered this material. B tier, it'll be back. B tier, you're going to see this content again, but you'll probably be okay if you've forgotten some of the minor details. C is pump and dump. C is, okay, learn this to pass a test, but it comes up so infrequently that you can probably just relearn the material on the spot when it comes up again without doing yourself too much damage. And then D tier is the stuff that I would not teach in the class if the curriculum didn't require me to teach it. So let's go ahead and sort the Calc 3 topics into these categories. So first of all, double and triple integrals. Double and triple integrals analytical. So specifically referring to the integrals that you set up and calculate via the fundamental theorem of calculus. Those of you who have taken Calc 2 with me know that I have some pretty strong feelings about the calculus curriculum in college and about how little of what we learn about integration in college is actually applicable to any kind of real world context. So I'm somewhere between C tier and D tier for this one, actually. I think we spend way too much time focused on fundamental theorem of calculus for integration, considering how rarely it's actually useful in a real world scenario. So I think I'll go ahead and put it in C tier just because I hate to put something in D tier that represents such a large portion of this course and Calculus 4. But to tell you the truth, I don't think that this topic is as useful as it should be, considering how much time we spend on this material. Now, by contrast, understanding what double and triple integrals represent, what they can be used to do in the real world, and how to calculate them numerically, this is a pretty big deal. Like Riemann sum estimates for your integrals as opposed to fundamental theorem of calculus. This is a big one, so I'm kind of split almost between S tier and A tier. I might put it in A tier just because I think there are some topics for S tier that are even more important than integration. Critical points. So I feel the same way about critical points that I do about analytically calculating integrals, where your teacher has to set up a pretty artificial problem in order for it to be feasible to find the critical points and classify the critical points by hand using analytical techniques. So for the same reasons as analytical integrals, I'm going to put critical points in C tier. They're not really that relevant in real world calculations because most real world functions are just too complicated to be able to calculate the critical points. So that's in C tier. Taylor series D tier. Immediate banishment to the Shadow Realm. Taylor series is a topic that I would not touch at all in Calculus 3 if I didn't have to. By contrast, linear approximation, first order approximation, this is really important and this is used a lot, particularly in the engineering fields. So linear approximation is going in S tier, that's for sure. But once you start to deal with higher order approximations than just linear, like for example, quadratic or cubic approximations, the increase in complexity of those approximations is usually not worth what you gain in terms of accuracy. So linear approximations, S tier, very important. Taylor series, D tier. I wish I could cut it from the curriculum completely. The gradient vector. So the gradient vector, I think that I will put up here in A tier probably. Gradient vector has a lot of different applications. Among other things, it can be used in the gradient descent algorithm. And the gradient descent algorithm is basically a more authentic way to do the critical points kind of calculations, where even if you have a quite complicated function, you can use gradient descent to locate local mins of the function, and you can use gradient ascent to locate local maxes of the function. So I think the gradient vector is just more broadly useful in more real world situations than critical points are. So for sure, I would put that in A tier for the class. Cylindrical and spherical coordinates for three-dimensional space. I think the utility of this maybe is between A tier and B tier. I might go ahead and put it in B tier actually. I think depending on what discipline you're pursuing, if you're doing mechatronics or if you're doing animation, cylindrical and spherical coordinates can be really nice in those contexts. But I don't think that they are as useful as some of the other topics above B tier in this list. Graphs of surfaces. I think graphs of surfaces is reasonably useful. I'll put it in B tier as well for it'll be back. If you're working on a problem that's in two-dimensional space or three-dimensional space, having a mental library of some of the most common functions and their graphs can make certain problems easier, especially in Calculus 4. But again, thinking about it from a real life perspective, most of the time your functions will be so exotic that they won't fall into like the categories of surfaces that you might learn in a Calculus 3 class. So useful sometimes, mostly in future math classes, but not necessarily so useful in the real world, in my opinion. Okay, this action of taking a vector and changing its length, S tier, absolutely. Taking a vector and changing its length is one of the most important topics that we teach in the class, both in terms of its utility in future math classes and also in terms of its utility in the real world. I perform this action pretty much on the daily as I'm doing game development and game design, and this is an action that's used in so many engineering formulas and physics formulas and stuff like that. Changing vector length is definitely S tier. Partial derivatives, broadly, I would say partial derivatives are in A tier. Understanding what partial derivatives are and what they represent, and a little bit how to calculate them from certain functions. I think that that is good conceptual knowledge to have. I also know that partial derivatives come up quite a bit as you progress into Calc 4 after this class, and if you end up taking partial differential equations. So I'll put that in A tier. Vector calculus, like vector derivatives, vector integrals, I will maybe put in A tier as well. Just because I think understanding conceptually how derivatives of vector valued functions can be taken and how integrals of vector valued functions can be taken can be useful in some math classes, but maybe D tier, because I think more important than abstract vector calculus are the specific applications of these ideas to motion problems. So I'm going to put vector calculus in B tier, and I'm going to put two-dimensional and three-dimensional motion into A tier, actually, because this is where you use the ideas of vector calculus to make sense of position, velocity, acceleration, curvature, etc., speed, distance traveled in a two or three-dimensional context. So 2, 3D motion is going into A tier, and vector calculus I'm going to put in B tier. Vector projection, S tier. Immediately S tier. Vector projection is one of those that just keeps coming back over and over and over again in many, many different contexts. We use vector projection so much in linear algebra, for example. It's a really neat tool for Calc 4. It's a really neat tool for lots of different sort of statics and physics problems. So vector projection is A tier as well, and I use this on the daily for game development as well. Unit tangent and unit normal vector, I think I will put maybe in B tier. This is kind of a stealth hit in terms of unit tangent and unit normal vector come up in more applications than you would expect them to. Not only can they be used to study the motion of an object going through 2D or 3D space, they also are used pretty often in computer graphics when trying to generate splines. A spline is a computer generated curve. So I would put unit tangent and unit normal in B tier just because they do come up more often than you would expect in real world applications. Parametrizing curves. So taking a curve and finding a vector valued function that generates that curve, I'm going to put that in A tier because this is used quite heavily in Calculus 4, and this is also used quite heavily in computer graphics when representing curves in a computer-friendly manner. This is one of those topics that students tend to sleep on and tend to think is less important than it actually is. And then they get into Calculus 4 and they're like, oh shoot, I wish I had learned this topic better. So this is definitely in the if forget then regret category. Vector arithmetic. So like addition, subtraction, and scaling, that's in A tier for sure. Actually S tier, right? Because I think, if you can't do vector addition, vector subtraction, and vector scaling, there are so many other really important actions that you can't perform. And vector arithmetic is used all over the place in all of STEM. Vector addition, subtraction, scaling. It's just a foundational, very, very important tool to have. So that I think for sure should be in S tier. Taking physical quantities and representing them appropriately as vectors, S tier as well. Again, this is kind of a prerequisite to all the other actions that you might perform upon a vector. It's just taking a quantity and representing it as a vector in the first step. So that one's going to be in S tier as well. Cross product, I'm going to put in B tier, I think. Maybe somewhere between B and C. I just don't tend to see cross product used that often. It is used sometimes when working with planes to generate the normal vector, and it is used sometimes when working on torque and things like that. So it does have a range of uses. And in particular, the normal vector to a plane is a pretty important application of cross product. So I'll go ahead and put that in B tier. It'll be back. It'll be back for sure in Calculus 4. It'll be back in many of your physics and engineering classes. And it'll be back in computer graphics as well. And finally, the dot product, S tier without a doubt. Definitely going top tier. Dot product is one of those actions that I use every single day, pretty much. Anytime a vector is around, a dot product will appear. Linear algebra is just like a million dot products being calculated for various reasons. So I would say if there's any topic from this class actually to learn and memorize, it would be dot product. I would put that absolutely at the very top of the S tier category. I think it's more important actually than anything else we cover in the course.